AI is profound. It is on par with the Industrial Revolution. But 4 years ago, we were talking about cloud compute. And 2 years before that, we were talking about big data. We have to remember technology needs to be in the service of people, not the other way around. The reason why I don't lean on technology in a lot of conversations is not because I don't find it interesting. I do. But for me, it is the vehicle. It is not the destination.
Hi, Jason. Welcome to Solar for CIO. How you doing?
Great. It's good to be with you, Tom.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think AI transformation is what we're currently living through. To some significant degree, it's picked up in pace, right, for everybody. What are your reflections on it in general, particularly for technology leaders?
Things were already happening when I was at VMware. Both myself and the CTO and the Chief Security Officer were very involved in drafting policies and really aligning the activities of the company, because the concern there is that people dive in and start using a tool and they really don't have an appreciation for the implications. So as an example, one obvious one is sharing private or restricted information in a public domain, right? It's a really obvious one, but a lot of corporations early on needed to set some guardrails around what people could and couldn't do in that space. Being an outsider, I'm spending a ton of time using AI tools, playing with AI tools, learning about AI, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I am particularly mindful of my colleagues that are in role right now that are dealing with organizational change. Definitely the attrition. The boards and the leadership teams have basically been set a challenge to find a saving, 20, 25, 30% saving in human resource without necessarily a strategy to make it happen. So it's like, here's your cut, now figure out how to do it with AI, right? So I'm very mindful that that's happening, not just in IT, that's happening across organizations, right? In sales teams, in marketing teams, and so on and so on. Support, certainly in support. So that's definitely happening. I'm mindful of that. And I think that's going to pose some really interesting challenges and opportunities down the road. In some ways, I'm happy to be an observer in this particular case.
And step back for a minute longer and just let things settle.
But there's a lot of other interesting things going on. And it's important to remind people that, yes, AI is profound. I think it is a revolution. It is on par with the Industrial Revolution. I think it is that profound. But 4 years ago, we were talking about cloud compute. And 2 years before that, we were talking about big data and so on and so on. And in another 2 years from now, we'll still be talking about AI, but we'll also be talking about something else. So, things continue.
I feel like I've, come a long way to see a fellow Englishman, all the way to the Bay Area.
You have 5,300 miles.
Yeah. Just to see an English guy there.
Yeah.
I got to ask, did you, are you obviously, you say fall now, you've done incredibly well. I'm sure you've acclimatized perfectly. But when you first came over, was there any cultural tension? Was there anything you had to adapt to? Was there any differences that people might not know?
I think it was mostly language. And I think I was always a fairly optimistic person anyway. I think just in how I think about the world and communicated about the world. Right, yeah. And I actually like to joke that I got kicked out of the UK because I was too optimistic and too excitable. So I think I probably found the right place for me.
That happens all the time, doesn't it? People find their second home or their real home in life, But it did obviously, it started in the UK. And in terms of, childhood, professional development, talk us through those early years.
I kind of struggled at school. It was a combination of fitting in. I am a little odd, and a little bit fitting in. Definitely found, my people in the music department, thankfully. I also am dyslexic, so reading was a real challenge. In fact, reading with any sort of reliability didn't happen until I was well into my teens. So that was a challenge, and ultimately graduated school in the summer of 87, and just before my 16th birthday, and left school, and set out, which seems bizarre talking about it now, but at the time just seemed like the right thing to do.
But you wanted to get straight into the workplace, get out on your own, live an independent life.
I think it was more a case of I couldn't. I think my dyslexia had really held me back.
Impaired.
Yeah, I think it really held me back in terms of how I learned. I think the other thing as well is that we tend to test at school for a very specific set of things, which I understand why, but it also means that you end up leaving a lot of people out, and it just wasn't my path.
What do you think, just last reflection on that, what do you think schools maybe do differently now or could still be doing better when they approach and try and educate and get the best out of children with dyslexia? And
certainly it's better understood now. I think recognition of learning difference is better understood now. And so that's good. And I don't think it's just schools. I think it's also families as well. I think there's a journey for everybody involved to recognize that, people are different, people learn differently. And by the way, this isn't just somebody who has what's considered a challenge, necessarily a learning challenge. This is true for everybody. It doesn't matter where you are on an IQ or an EQ spectrum. Everybody has different preferences and different ways of absorbing information. So I think families being aware, schools and communities being aware and helping people on their journey is important.
Before you went into sort of full-time work, 16 years old, did you say?
Yep.
Had you already done some work as a kid? I think you mentioned working with your dad.
Yeah. Our father had an industrial cleaning business in the town that I was born in. And it was very common for me on a Saturday morning to get up at 3:30, 4 a.m. with him and go into Dartford, and it was pretty common for me to be really cleaning windows on Dartford High Street.
Nice and
as
early.
A kid. And also sweeping the mats in the shopping centre in Dartford. It was a kind of an interesting journey. I mean, it certainly helped develop my work ethic. I don't mind working hard, but also just connecting with people, recognizing that there's value in people. Regardless of what they do as a profession, there's a lot more to people than just what they do as a job, and investing the time to understand that really is important. And I think that's probably shaped how I operate today.
It's a joy to work with other people, isn't it, quite often? And,
well, I think some people might too. It depends on their customers.
Somewhat.
But yeah.
And so how did that vocational journey develop from there? And did you move into Dartford to live by yourself, did you?
No, actually, I moved from Kent to Surrey. I got a job on a thing called the Youth Training Scheme, which was a thing back in the 80s. And it was at a place in Weybridge, the first purpose-built motor racetrack in the world, reputedly the first place anyone flew in the UK. Some dispute over that in a place in Scotland, but anyway. And it was the old Vickers or British Aerospace site in Brooklands. Was part of it had been set aside as a museum, the old racing track clubhouse. And I joined them as they were turning that into a museum as the British Aerospace site was being wound up. And that was an incredibly exciting time. I mean, on the cusp of 16, showing up at this place with, pieces of aeroplanes, including pieces of Concorde, Harrier jump jets, and then planes, the Wellington bomber that had been pulled out of Loch Ness, racing cars that had held the land speed record for decades. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, really just, I thought I'd hit the lucky step on the way down the stairs. It was crazy.
And you're surrounded by technology of a sort.
Absolutely.
Of course, yeah. And do you see that as sort of foundational to your later sort of career in IT and
I do. I think a couple of things happened. One is I wasn't just surrounded by some amazing technology, even though a lot of it was legacy technology.
Sure.
I was surrounded by the people that made that technology. There were people at the museum who had, in fact, one of the people I became very close to and friendly with used to be the chief design assistant to Barnes Wallis. So for the Brits, they'll probably know that. Everybody else, you may have heard of the bouncing bomb that was used in World War II to destroy a series of hydroelectric dams in Germany. They were really pivotal in the Second World War, and Norman Borer, Spud, as he went by, was Barnes Wallis's assistant. And I got to hang out with people like him, many other people like him, and hear their stories, but also to be able to have conversations around how they solved interesting problems about how you spin something at high speed and drop it at a certain altitude on water and how it will skip like a pebble. I mean, conversations like that, really pretty exciting and interesting, and certainly sparks the imagination.
So at some point you commandeered one of the old planes and you flew.
No,
you flew in. How did we end up migrating over?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that when I was working at the museum, I ended up at the Air and Space Museum in DC on a brief secondment. And basically, I was blown away by the US on that short visit. It really inspired me. And I made the decision then that I wanted to move to the US one day. But it was going to be a bit of a journey. I left the museum, ended up working for an American company, Symantec in the UK. And they ultimately had an operation in the Netherlands. I helped set up their headquarters in the Netherlands for Europe. And then over time, that led to me transitioning to Eugene in Oregon.
And we're at the beginning now of an IT career, effectively, right?
Well,
it's begun in earnest. What were you focused on? What were you doing?
The museum was already the beginning of that. It was one of those situations where, they had a lot of people who knew their thing, but nobody knew the computers. And it was when Amstrad computers were a thing. They were just coming out. And somebody needed to set up the telephone system and somebody needed to set up the computers. And they all looked at me and I picked up a manual and figured it out. So that was kind of it was a situations demanded someone take responsibility, and I ran with it. And that was kind of the beginning of that sparked the interest in technology. But ultimately it was really an extension of helping people.
How does a career develop, both in terms of where you will work and how your ambitions with it start to develop and your skill sets?
The museum definitely informed that. Moving to Symantec in the UK, I originally joined to do customer support. It was another situation of them saying, hey, somebody needs to look after IT. So I started doing that in my spare time. I think they call that Saturday and Sunday.
Sure.
At Symantec. So I took on the responsibility of IT there, and that was really kind of where, and officially, I became the IT guy.
You ended up going extremely, extremely far in your IT career, all the way to the very top, and CIO at VMware, which we're going to touch upon shortly. What would you say the big milestones were between that point, very nascent IT career, and being able to make it into a position of executive leadership?
I think big milestones would be other people recognizing that potential and giving me a chance. I think that so often in life you can have a plan, an aspiration maybe, but we don't often give enough credit to the people that see that potential in us, or see other potentials in us and help steer us on that path. So I can remember somebody at Symantec in particular recognizing the IT potential I had and the potential to help them and help the organization and, help me get the opportunity in the Netherlands. Can you imagine? At that point, I think I was 17, 18 years old, 18, I think, and they needed to set up an operation in the Netherlands, and somebody's like, hey, we need some help, do you think you can help us? Now, that was coupled with, drive and excitement and energy and, yes, some capability to help them do it. But then to go to the Netherlands, my goodness, to go to another country that's people speak a different language, have different culture, different expectations, different needs, different ways of working together. That was an incredible journey. And then from there, people in the States then seeing what I'd done in the Netherlands for them and saying, oh my goodness, how do we get this guy, involved in other things? So there are definitely people along the way who I'm thinking about who definitely helped shape that journey for me and saw the potential and then helped create possibilities for that.
And what's your relationship with technology at this point in your career, and how's that starting to develop in terms of what's interesting you in it, where the opportunity is that you see going forward for business, for your career, etc.?
So I've been interested in technology and playing with technology since I was probably 10 or 11 years old. I used to make circuits at home, very small circuits with, small motors and solar panels and pressure pads and things, mostly things I'd taken out of other things that I shouldn't have necessarily. But playing with technology. So I'd been interested in technology and the potential of using technology to solve problems since those early days. And then at Symantec, the obvious stuff, helping with desktops and then networking happened. And then obviously that evolved into servers and so on. So it was situations created a demand for me to learn new skills. So that's kind of how that evolved. I've been interested in technology and playing with technology for such a long time, but it was always about the outcome, what the technology can do. I was never absolutely absorbed by the technology only.
Do you think that was a defining characteristic for what kind of powered your career effectively? Do you think a lot of IT professionals are kind of transfixed by the technology, are very, very into it for its own sake almost, and kind of find their niche accordingly.
I think people are on their own journey. I think where it really gets interesting is when people bring their other interests together. So one of the things I'm very, very fascinated by and now, and something I'm actually very focused on now, is the intersection where technology and other disciplines come together. That for me is like a light bulb moment. I think I realized that fairly early on, but maybe didn't have the words to explain it.
When you reflect retrospectively, then where do you see those early marriages of technology plus?
Probably at Symantec, probably in the Netherlands. I remember one of the things we set up in the Netherlands was one of the first purpose-built private voice networks. That came around before the Maastricht Treaty was signed. So for those that don't know, the Maastricht Treaty was essentially the official forming of the European Union. And it's when things like technology standards and things and moving technology equipment across borders became possible. So before that even happened, we were already developing private voice networks. And I was figuring out how to route calls between different countries and do that economically, coming up with dialing plans, thinking about how we make that easy for people to do or even invisible for people to do so it was economical for companies. So I think, again, it was about how do you solve a problem and how do you leverage technology when appropriate to do that.
And what were your earliest experiences of like management and team building and such like?
I think Eugene, Oregon was probably where I had some real epiphanies about the difference between being a manager and a leader. We had a contact center to set up. I remember the conversation I had with Dana Siebert, who was and is a friend of mine and who was responsible for having me go to the Netherlands and then ultimately the States. And I met with him in the May, and he said to me, "We need to turn a department store into a contact center, and it needs to be done by September.
Right.
And I want your help, and we need to build a team, and so on and so on." And you know, if you'd said to me, "Hey, I need a network or a server or I need a data center or whatever," I'd have known how to do that. Yeah. It's like, no, we need a team. We need people that can do that. So that was a real new challenge. And then recognizing what the difference is between managing people but actually leading people and developing a culture of people to achieve those things. I think probably the project in Eugene was the real spark there.
I think this actually touched upon something we were talking about before the interview with regards to, particularly when setting up HQs, but as almost like a guiding principle in general, which is that balance between, I think you put it as like design and utility.
Yeah.
Right. And I guess that's an early exposure to that. I mean, how does that tension and that dynamic kind of shape your development in general, and what other key experiences attuned you to that?
It was actually probably my first big mistake actually. We built an amazing contact center, and I just had a blast doing it and ended up working with some incredible people. I mean, people I truly admire and learn a ton from. But it's a good example of actually me over-engineering something.
Oh, yeah.
And I ended up with the team, but my responsibility was definitely creating this very flexible network configuration where, and this is at a time where phone networks and telephone networks or voice networks and data networks were separate things. The two will never meet. That's how it used to be. Hard to imagine today, but that's how it used to be. And we came up with this flexible design of being able to basically use RJ45s or Ethernet, essentially an Ethernet cable like jack, to cross-connect telephones and networks. And we ended up really over-flooding and over-cabling the building to do that, which ended up costing a lot more money. So that's not good, right? You're running a business. But also, I think, adding additional levels of complexity there. So I learned a lesson early on there that function is really important, but you also have to marry that with the experience, and you also have to balance that with the value. So experience, capability, and value have to be in balance.
Yeah. So along with team building, you get some sort of fundamental kind of encounters with it.
Yeah.
Maybe we just sort of jump forward into the sort of second stage of your career. I mean, where would it be a good place to start? You've got some amazing names here: BlackRock, Juniper, before VMware. I mean, where do you feel like the career went to the next level, and your skill set and understanding of what leadership was about kind of expanded?
I joined Barclays Global Investors in 2006, February 2006, and they were later acquired by BlackRock. But Barclays Global Investors were owned by Barclays Bank at the time, but they were very much arm's length. Barclays, really just left them to their own devices. I think they were doing incredibly well, and they thought it was best just to leave them alone and keep cashing the checks. It was kind of like that, and BGI, as they were known, was an amazing place. Really incredible people, incredibly smart, very domain specific. It's an investment bank, very domain specific, managing trillions of dollars of other people's money. It was an incredible place. About 8,000 people, I think, in total employees. But I remember joining there in 2006. And within about 8 weeks of joining, there was a major network outage, which was a problem because they just hired me to be the network guy.
It's a problem.
Yeah, it's a problem. I'd figured out where the loos were, where the coffee was, and a few people's names at this point.
Sure.
But I remember us having to execute the continuity plan for the business. Here I am.
What does that look like? Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question. The bank had actually been incredibly responsible in terms of practicing a lot of things, tabletop exercises around a lot of scenarios, but they hadn't planned for this because what is it? The planning is everything. The plan is nothing, I think, is the old adage. I just remember it being a very interesting place with, a number of opportunities. And one was they really had underestimated and underinvested in their infrastructure.
Right.
So that was kind of what I did for the next period, which was really lean into not only the recovery from that situation, but really helping the organization build something that was fit for purpose, creating an environment that's fit for purpose. And that includes not just the technology, but also the discipline around the people and the processes that are involved.
That's kind of been a guiding principle for your career, right? Is that people element. And,
yes.
and I think we spoke earlier about how at VMware, one of the things you had to overturn was the way that users were conceptualized by IT, right, into colleagues in your sense. And in fact, we're obviously sponsored by Nexthink, who coined, if you didn't know, the term digital employee experience, which is a similar kind of ethos. Talk to us about the development of that perception and the way that technology provision had to kind of reconfigure itself as something that was people-centric rather than sort of technology-centric.
Soul of the CIO is sponsored by Nexthink. Now, if you work in IT, you'll know too well how disruptions can derail productivity fast. Nexthink's AI-powered platform for digital employee experience keeps you ahead. It uncovers issues others can't see and resolves them automatically with employee-centric AI and always-on automation. Employees stay productive, IT stays proactive and even preventative, and leadership sees results. Nexthink, ahead of every IT disruption, behind every strategy. Learn more at nexthink.com.
When I joined VMware, it was initially to be responsible for what was then called end user services.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the relationship between IT as a whole and the business, the rest of the business, was really bad. I mean, really bad. And what is quite common in technology companies, and certainly companies that are very engineering heavy, is that you have the research and development, the engineering, the programmers, if you will, and then you have everybody else. And, it kind of makes sense because they're often creating and running the products or the services, sure. Right? Yeah. But there tends to be, not always, but there tends to be kind of this them and us attitude. And I don't think IT had done anything to ingratiate itself with the engineering community. And if anything, it just reinforced all the stereotypes that the engineering team had. The company had, a few months before, got a new CIO, Chief Information Officer, to kind of come in and help really kind of change things. Baskaya came in to do that. And he and I had worked together at Juniper, and he's like, hey, we need someone to come in and, fix this and run end user services, which was, I thought, a bit of a step down because I'd been running a lot more than that elsewhere. But he's like, trust me,
It's going to be a big job.
It's going to be a big job. And the company is kind of getting more into the product space. It's not just virtual servers anymore. They're doing a lot more in the end user space as well as a product from a product perspective. So we think we'll have you lean into that too.
Sure.
I kind of started on that journey, but one of the first meetings I can remember having, once I kind of gone around and talked to all of the stakeholders in the business and elsewhere, one of the first conversations I had with the team was, we need to change our name. We need to stop referring to people as users. We need to stop being this other thing. I mean, othering is never a good thing anywhere, but that's what was going on. There was IT, they were the enemy, they were the other, right? And there was the engineers.
Were the users the enemy and the other?
Indeed. And then, equally, the IT folks were looking at the engineers and thinking they were the enemy. So we got to change that. And we need to get to a place where everybody's talking about, recognizing we're in this boat together. So we changed the department name from End User Services to Colleague Experience and Technology. And the use of the word experience was very intentional, because I believe that shaping the experience people have, how you reduce the friction in someone's workflow, how you create an environment where people can do their best work, is critical. It's fundamental. So the reason why I don't lean on technology in a lot of conversations is not because I don't find it interesting. I do. But for me, it is the vehicle. It is not the destination, right? The technology is fascinating. And we could have a whole separate conversation just about technology. But for me, it is the vehicle of getting to where you're going. So we actually had a little mission statement for the team. I'll tell you what it is, which was enable our colleagues to do their best work by delivering a delightful technology experience. And when I used the term delightful at first, a lot of people kind of looked at me like I was Mary Poppins.
Sure,
right? They were just waiting for me to burst into song. Yeah, right? But I'm like, no. And you know why delightful? Because it's the opposite to frustrated. And if you ask most people, certainly if you went back a little bit, if you ask most people what their emotional relationship is with technology, it would be frustrated.
Kind of exemplary of the CIO who does more than be a CIO, who does a sort of strategic partnership of a business. And you kind of alluded that, I think, to when you were talking about leaning into product a bit more at VMware. Give us the overview of, if it preceded your time at VMware, tell us about how that was seeded. But at VMware, how did that role as CIO first come to you, and how did it become more than the conventional head of IT or information?
So the relationship with product goes back to Symantec, actually. I left IT at the end of 99. So while a lot of people were running around with tinfoil hats on because of Y2K, for those folks that aren't familiar, there was a lot of concern that the technology wasn't going to be fit for purpose when the millennium arrived. And there was some basis in that, but I think people had kind of got a little carried away and turned it into a Netflix special in their mind. But anyway, I was actually in the Himalayas hiking. Nice. I went there with my brother for 2 months, which was great. And came back, I was taking a work break, and I came back, and I can remember having a conversation with the then CEO of Symantec, John Thompson, and him saying to me, Jason, because I was going to leave. I was going to leave the company and go and find something else to do. He's like, what do you want to do? What's kind of interesting to you? I mean, what a gift. I mean, to be asked that question, amazing. Right? And you got to remember, this is 25 years ago, and I said, I think something's going to happen with this thing called Bluetooth. And I think Wi-Fi is going to become more mainstream, and I think we need to be thinking about those spaces. And he's like, great. Why don't you go and work in the product organization for a while? So I moved into product management. This IT guy goes into product management. I ended up having an amazing boss, Sarah Hicks, who was just, is an amazing human being and an amazing product leader. And I worked for Sarah and her team for about 3 years. And I really was inspired by that and learned a lot more about what goes into developing products, not just for the users or colleagues in a particular organization, but recognizing all the richness and variation that exists in the world. Not everybody runs the same phone, not everyone runs the same version of a phone, and so on and so on and so on.
So what brought you back to IT from that opportunity in product?
I left Symantec in the summer of 2003 because I realized I really needed a break, and it was actually part of my journey of coming out. Sure. And I ended up taking a couple of years off and doing a bunch of travel and just kind of discovering myself, which was really a great opportunity, but also a pretty challenging time for me as a person. When I was ready to re-engage, to go and find a job, that's when I interviewed at Barclays Global Investors, and started that journey.
And that was just straight into a new IT opportunity, which is an amazing one.
It was interesting for all the reasons I've already shared, but it was also, I made the conscious decision that I needed to kind of start a little bit lower in the organization and then try and work my way up, because I'd been out of the loop for a little while.
Sure.
And which is exactly what I did. The process accelerated because of events at Barclays and my journey there. But
things ultimately came full circle, and you have the opportunity at VMware to lean back into innovation a little bit more as part of a role.
Yes, I did some of that at Juniper Networks, but certainly at VMware I was able to contribute, and the team was able to contribute in very new and different ways. One of the things you quite often see in a very engineering-rich environment is you work with super smart people, top of their game, especially in the Valley, top of their game in the world, often, right? And sometimes they're solving problems that are intellectually interesting, but they're not actually grounded necessarily in the customer's experience or need. And that's not a criticism, it's more an observation. And I think one of the things
part of a healthy, innovative culture, right?
Yeah. And I think one of the things we were able to do was to provide that perspective and input. But also we learned a ton too. I mean, the journey for the IT team through that process was very, very rich. And I think I actually know for a fact a number of people that used to be in IT in my team that worked with that group are now themselves product managers or product engineers.
I was going to say, do you think the traditional silos are starting to dissolve, and where do you see the role of CIO continue? How do you see it continuing to evolve over coming years?
The domain of technology has been democratized.
Yeah.
And lots of things have changed there. I think cloud-based computing has changed that dramatically. Software as a service has changed that dramatically. The fact that you can have, for all intents and purposes, a very mature business that's run by a handful of people because technology has been democratized is an incredible advancement. I think that as departments in companies have been able to make their own choices about technology, that creates new challenges though. So you no longer need the IT department because you need a server from them, or you need a database from them, or you need a network from them, or a desktop or whatever. You need that organization to be a partner in helping steer the business, finding solutions that not only meet the unique needs of one department, but actually build that road for the rest of the company to move down. Marketing going off and choosing their own solution because they love it doesn't work if it doesn't connect to the solution that the sales team need, doesn't work if it doesn't connect to the support organization or the product organization. So I think the role of IT, the role of the CIO and the chief digital officer and so in organizations is evolving from being a service department to being a strategic imperative, actually, which is why I think more and more companies are seeing that role be elevated, not just necessarily reporting to the financial officer, but being a seat at the with the CEO and others. I think that's definitely the case. I also think that not just business enablement, but I think risk and security in particular are also forcing that point, because businesses are increasingly more vulnerable, especially in a time that's geopolitically unstable. I think the necessity for really clear-eyed strategic planning around technology and security is critical.
Do you feel like you took to all of these new challenges and the new vistas of the CIO role with with great enthusiasm, or were there very distinct challenges that came with it?
No, it was actually a surprise. I had been toying with the idea in I can remember very vividly actually being in India on a particular trip in January of 2020. Where I'd been thinking about my career and thinking about, maybe I want to try the CIO thing. Maybe I should look for, my next gig somewhere else, small outfit where I can try that, see if I'm up to it. I'd played all the positions below CIO. I'd never played that position. Having that responsibility at VMware, no, that was a real kind of shock to the system. Probably the most challenging thing I've done in my life.
What's your advice to somebody who's faced with that challenge and needs to adapt to that?
Definitely lean into your strengths, no question. Remember, you're part of a team, not just the team you are responsible for leading, but actually an executive leadership team. I think that's one thing that was definitely a learning for me. Is the executive team is that. They're not just individuals with a very big title. They are a team. They are steering the ship for the organization. And it's really important that they rely on and pull on each other. So that would definitely be up there.
What were some of the milestone achievements when you look back? Obviously, your time at VMware only came to an end because it was sold, about 18 months ago?
Yeah. Broadcom acquired, the deal closed in, I think it was November of 2023, yeah.
And maybe we won't get into that, but leading up to it, what are the milestone achievements as a CIO you're most proud of?
I think actually less about the title, and I think just being part of VMware. It was an incredible company, and no organization is perfect. Anybody that thinks so is kidding themselves. Every organization has opportunities to challenge and grow and change, and VMware certainly had those. But one of the things that I overwhelmingly appreciate and carry every day with me is the culture that we had at VMware, the culture of collaboration, the culture of being creative and innovative and challenging, the desire to excel on behalf of our customers it was palpable. You could feel it. And there wasn't a lot of room for people who didn't play nice. That's not to say people weren't called on their stuff. People were absolutely called on their stuff. But it was a very collegiate, very supportive environment, and a desire to push people to achieve their full potential, which was amazing, and I think critical everywhere.
That level of success and opportunity often gives you a freedom of movement, the freedom to kind of pause, to take stock of what you want to do next and where to move next that you don't always have at earlier stages in your career. How would you describe your sort of post-VMware position? I know you're writing a book at the moment, right? What's going on for you, and what's your view of the landscape, just one step out of it at the moment?
I made a conscious decision as the deal took a while to close. So I had plenty of time to think about what I wanted to do next, and came up with all these grand ideas, but ultimately decided the best thing I could do is to have a break, which has been wonderful. I've really been enjoying that. One of the things that you often don't get to do when you're in a corporate environment, fast-paced environment, high-pressure environment, is to actually take time and stock to think and research and reflect. You're often dealing in the moment, what's ahead of you and what's immediately ahead of you. And it's been wonderful to be able to spend time researching and reading. I've been doing a ton of that. I've been doing a ton of writing. Yes, the book, Overtech, I'm working on that right now. But also I'm publishing an article, on average one a week, on my website. You want to check it out, JasonConyard.com. If you check out the articles there, always on topics that interest me. Sometimes I do a standalone, quite often a series of different topics, working on one right now about human-computer interaction and our senses. So always working on things like that are interesting to me. In terms of my next role, we'll see. There are a couple of things have come my way, and unless they are super interesting and really feed that energy and that desire that I have, then I'll take my time. I'll wait for the right thing.
What are the key lessons of those processes of digital transformation that you will maybe bring into your next role, or you think should steer other people in that role now?
Yeah, that's very easy. Yeah. And that is, don't optimize a bad process. So often people throw a piece of technology at a process or a problem that actually should just be eliminated. And instead what happens is they try and optimize the heck out of it, leveraging technology, and what they should do is just fundamentally reorganize.
How do you discern what does and doesn't need rejection or improvement?
It requires organizational overview. So you have to be able to look at a whole organization. I think it's one of the big roles of a CIO is to be able to look across an organization and see how technology is used and how it's applied and how it stitches together. To fundamentally look at the business processes behind that and ask the question, are they fit for purpose? And the And the easiest way to do that is ask the questions of why. Ask why is this way? And as soon as you hit somebody saying it's because we've always done it that way, you know you got a live one. So I think that's
a great way.
I think
everyone does it. It's another good response.
I mean, we all know,
it's
right?
Just what's done.
We all absolutely. We all know. And then the other thing that happens is fascinating to see how much energy is associated with defending something people can't explain. So I think that's also a good thing to look into. So when you see that people are very resistant to change, but they can't explain why, that warrants some real attention.
How much of that is psychological and just about the way people are as individuals, and how much of that is institutional in your?
They're the same thing. One is an individual and one is a collective, but it's psychological.
They're reflections of one another.
It's psychological, which is another reason why I love technology, but again, it's a vehicle, right? You got to understand people. You always comes back to people. I think the point with AI there is the same, which is we're really obsessed with AI. It's both interesting and scary and has huge potential. But we have to remember technology needs to be in the service of people, not the other way around. And it's the same with designing solutions for, quote, end user services or colleague experience in technology, which is the technology needs to be in the service of people. And if it is, we're getting it right. And if it isn't, we need to stop and think.
What did you say the book was called again?
Well, I'm kind of playing with the title of it right now.
Overtech?
Overtech is where I am at the moment, yeah.
I thought of it because I wondered if that doesn't connect to what you were just saying. But I think
absolutely.
You're keeping your powder dry with a book a little bit, as you should.
But you want to know someone wants to know what's on my mind, check out my website.
Yeah. There's lots of good essays there, it's true. So let's look ahead for you and for IT and for the CIO role in general. I mean, how much any predictions as to where the industry is heading in the next 3 to 5 years? First of all,
goodness knows. I mean, every time I see somebody do one of those end of year wrap ups, I both read it and admire it and then laugh. Right? It's really hard to say. I think that we are, as I said, definitely think we're in a revolution right now from a technology perspective. I think AI will represent the closest thing we've had to an industrial revolution. It will be global. Interestingly, at a time where we're not acting globally, we're all very much, from a national perspective, very much focused on self-interest. So I think there's some concern and some tension around that as well. And I think trying to navigate that, trying to lead a multinational company right now in a landscape that's constantly changing strategically, with technology that's evolving as rapidly as it is, my goodness, I mean, it's going to be, it is a big challenge for anybody in that space.
If you could design for yourself an ideal next opportunity, perfect one, what would it look like?
Probably a product focused on productivity, helping people do their very best work. I think that's what I would focus on. For me, the product space is really interesting. Helping individuals, helping teams and organizations achieve their full potential is very interesting to me. But ultimately, finding that mix with somewhere that's matched with a human-centered culture is really key. And I'll look until I find it or create it, one or the other.
I might know a guy. You touched earlier, Jason, upon the significance of having a career break for your own personal development and self-knowledge. How important do you think that is as a thing we should all sort of factor into or consider for our personal development? Well,
it was certainly a luxury. So I recognize that not everybody has the opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to take a couple of months and go to the Himalayas. So the answer is absolutely, if you can, do it. But I would also say it's a reflection on me not being good about pacing myself. So I don't come with a dimmer switch, unfortunately. I wish I did. I'm either on or off, and which means that, you can get burnout. And I think that being able to pace yourself, doing more self-care, exercise, eating well, having fun, enjoying life, not just working all the time is really, really important. So yes, career breaks are great if you can do them, but equally pacing yourself, doing some self-care is really, really important for everybody to do.
What would your definition be of success? Because, you've known significant career success. I'm sure you've seen great financial success, but I have a feeling that wouldn't be how you define it.
No, I also don't think it's a destination. I think that, we have successful meetings, we have successful days, we have successful, matches. I think success is something you've got to constantly strive for, but you have to define it for yourself. For me, it would be being more in balance would be success. Being able to take time to listen to others and learn from others, to me, is success. It's not wealth. It's not a title. I think the other thing I would say that brings me personally a tremendous amount of joy is being able to help others. And that's something I'm leaning into now as well, doing mentoring and advising work.
How's that been, that adaptation from being mentored to the mentor? And
when you have the big title and the big job, people come to you as the fountain of knowledge. You're the decider in many regards, right? It's nice to be in a situation where that burden or that responsibility isn't there, and you can kind of relax and provide more life perspective, put things in a little bit more perspective for others. I think is really helpful, and certainly something I get a lot of pleasure from.
Well, Jason, best of luck finishing the book, and hopefully rejoining the fray, because I think the industry is a lot richer when you're there, in the thick of it.
I've been asked a few times, have you retired? I'm like, hell no.
Ready. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on Solo for CIO. It's been great to have you on.
Thanks, Tom.